Recently, a friend of mine sent me an audio message on WhatsApp. And part of our conversation revolved around looking for what might be the best distribution of Linux to jump to from Windows. Here's a bit of the criteria that he said he was looking for.
If I wanted to install a distro on my old Windows 10 PC, something light that can run on this old hardware and that I don't have to tinker around with just to get it to work. I just want to be able to install it and it'll work for web browsing, for writing emails, that kind of stuff, and to connect a drive to where I could remote in to access files. So any recommendations? I really did like Ubuntu when I used it back in the day. I tried Mint back then, but I don't really remember anything about it. Oh, that's the other thing. I want an interface that looks relatively familiar, that I don't have to try to figure out how it works. I also have an old Chromebook that I just stopped using because it was so sluggish. I mean, man, it could be close to 15 years old by now. If I can get it to be even running a little bit more efficiently, and pretty much everything I do is web-based anyway, maybe maybe it's time to try out Linux on it. Um, the only thing I'm wondering about is periphery type stuff, and so that's my only slight concern. Is that I know that sometimes Linux doesn't play nice with stuff that's getting connected to the machines unless you have certain drivers or whatever. I mean, it's just an extra machine there that I can use for you know, extra stuff that I don't have to depend on day to day. So that's one reason why I think it might be the perfect use for getting some Linux in my life.
So first of all, we need to define best out-of-box experience. Not having to tinker is relative to the experience you want to have out of the box. I mean, even Mac OS isn't necessarily a good out-of-box experience depending on your preferences. Coming from years of Windows, there was a lot of things that I had to do on Mac OS to get it working and a lot of tweaks that I had to do for what I consider a good out-of-box experience. But another person would have the same thing to say about Windows. So with that caveat out of the way, and if you're coming from Windows 10 and you don't want to tinker and you're using almost exclusively web apps and a web browser, and if your idea of customization comes down to changing the wallpaper and maybe your folder icon colors, ZorinOS might be a great choice for you for a good out-of-the-box experience. When Windows 10 had its end of life, millions of users suddenly switched not to Windows 11, but to ZorinOS specifically. I've used it personally, and if you want to do some wild Linuxy stuff and a lot of customizations, it will be limited. But if you want a Windows replacement, in my opinion, it will be the cleanest, most aesthetically pleasing, simplest, least terminal involved distro that I have tried to date. And if I hadn't wanted to try distros that claimed better gaming performance or better compatibility with video software like DaVinci Resolve, I would have gladly stuck on ZorinOS. I feel like they were really thoughtful in the UI, specifically for people who came from Windows. Now, if you've been a long time in Linux, you're probably going to suggest Linux Mint, and I have a reason why I'm not going to suggest Linux Mint to my friend here or others in his situation, which we'll get to later. Chapter marks down below if you just want to get over there so that you can start your rant in the comments about why Mint is the best distro ever. Here's some things that I think my friend and maybe you will enjoy about ZorinOS. Zorin Connect. It's a reskin of KDE Connect, which will allow you to have sort of cross conversations between your phone and your computer, being able to send text messages, having file transfer back and forth, similar to something like AirDrop. And the cool thing is, it doesn't just work between Android and Linux, it works between iPhone and Linux, which is crazy. If you've used anything like the Windows Phone Link app on Windows, it's kind of similar to that, but better. Bottles/Windows support app. This is another great app, which again is not actually a first-party app by Zorin. This is basically a wizard. You're a wizard, Harry, if you will, for Wine, which helps you install Windows apps onto Zorin. Like anything in Wine, some things will work, some things will not. That's not really the fault of Wine or Bottles or Zorin or Linux in general. These things were not written for Linux. The fact that it can run any of them is kind of a miracle. Now, if you are the kind of person like my friend who is mostly using the G Suite online in a browser, you're not even going to need this app. Okay, Another elephant in the room. Why are there so many elephants in this room? Like, is there something in my tea? Mint is another valid one if you're looking for a Linux distro specifically to replace Windows. Now, look, even before I got into the Apple ecosystem with my Mac and my iPhone and my iPad and my AirPods and my Apple Watch, which I sold because I didn't really use it beyond any of the functions that a basic dollar store watch could do. Maybe that's another video for another time. But in my humble opinion, I think ZorinOS is a much prettier UI than Mint. Mint feels like a great Windows replacement from 2003, and Zorin feels like a great Windows replacement from the 2020s. Zorin feels fairly Windows-like and very streamlined for the person whose mindset is that of a Windows user. And this might feel like heresy to many, but I just find Linux Mint, as great as it is, and ran it on a server for a bit and I started exploring it more. And because of my video on Maple Linux, like in the description below, which is Debian based and running Cinnamon, I did a lot more exploration of that sort of ecosystem and I found a lot to like. But I still find Mint and the Cinnamon desktop dated looking, feeling, and lacking features of even other Linux distros. Something really simple like hitting the start menu and being able to type shutdown or restart, which I could do in Pop! OS, for example, is a really nice feature that is lacking in Linux Mint. Now, to be fair, you can't do this in Windows either unless you're using Raycast, which is another app that I really recommend. I should really do a Raycast video one of these days. I've got so many ideas for videos right now. And it's something that I really miss, being able to just type in shut down and then shut it down. Yeah, I know I could probably do that in the terminal. I don't want to use the terminal. And I miss that when I'm running Linux Mint. That said, it is a legitimately decent distro, fairly Windows-like, and runs on old hardware very well. The server that I mentioned that was running Linux Mint doesn't even have an SSD in it, just a hard drive. And I'm often surprised by how, I don't know if I'd go so far as saying snappy, but how tolerable it is to use for basic usage on something that doesn't even have a modern SSD. Okay, so I've convinced you, you're gonna use Zorin. Zorin Lite or Zorin Pro? My recommendation would be to stick to Zorin Lite. The Pro is paid, and now if you wanna support the developer, go for it. If that's your reason for getting the Pro, because you wanna support the developer and future development of that operating system, do it. But if you're doing it because you want to get the installed software, I don't really recommend it. All of that software can be downloaded for free, and some of it might be stuff that you don't even really want or need anyway. So you're not even going to have to go in and install all of those things for yourself. So it's not even really the time saving that you would think it is by getting the Pro version. The only other thing that you're going to get with that is like custom desktop UIs and support from Zorin if you need that sort of thing. But custom desktop UIs to make things look more Mac-like or more like Ubuntu or something like that. But quite frankly, if you're the kind of person like my friend coming from Windows, you don't care about any of that, the stock layout for Zorin is going to be perfect for you. Now let's talk about long-term support. Many don't like that paid versions of Zorin exist, but that's a plus in my opinion because it means more long-term development from Zorin. Arguably, that's also something in Mint's favor. It's been around longer, so it's been in development longer. There's more trustworthiness to believe that it's going to stay here compared to Zorin, but Mint doesn't have any financial incentives. And so I think in one sense, you could argue that it could just disappear at any time if people just stop volunteering their time. But either one is based on Ubuntu. So the great thing about that is that you can search up almost any technical issue you might have with either one of them, and the Ubuntu answer is probably going to work for you. Now, what about drivers? These days, most Linux distros seem to do as good or even better than Windows when it comes to drivers for peripherals like things like printers. So at worst, it's not going to be any harder for you than it is on Windows. My friend mentioned wanting to install ZorinOS or whatever OS I might have recommended on his old Chromebook. Now, while this is doable, based on some of the research that I did, it's actually quite a bit more complicated than putting it on your standard PC. So that's a whole other video for somebody who has a Chromebook to actually make. Bottom line, ZorinOS aesthetically and as a simple GUI-focused Windows alternative for the 99% is my recommendation. If you'd like to know how to install it and set that up, I've got a whole separate video coming for that, so stay subscribed to the channel and let me know what your favorite Windows alternative Linux is down below and why you would recommend it to someone else. Until next time, peace.